Welcome. Glad you could make it. Hey, Goat Man. All right. Not much, just trying to keep this on the regular. Having to try it on my phone today because yesterday my laptop crashed right at the end of the live, and I don't think it can handle the demand of live streaming. Let's see. Welcome, everyone. Yeah, I was using a TikTok Studio. I'm wondering if I use OBS or something, another streaming service or recording service, that it will be a little bit more stable. But at the same time, my computer's pretty old. Welcome, Woodmiser. Oh, looks like we got a guest.
Hello?
Hey, Leland, how are you doing?
I'm good. So, what is your topic mean, basically?
Yeah, so a lot of individuals will say that, if you believe in God, it doesn't matter how you arrived at that belief. It is irrational, and anyone who thinks that there is a God is acting irrationally. And my point is that an individual can believe that there is a God for rational reasons, just because rationally doesn't necessarily. It just means that they use logic and reason to arrive at that conclusion.
All right. So that means you're basically saying there's more evidence to support the fact there is a God than there isn't a God?
No, it's not even a question of more evidence. The example I like to use is when you look at the scientific community, you have people who say that the universe has an infinite past and always existed in that infinite past. And you also have people who say that the universe had a temporal beginning, and many other different interpretations. And there isn't a situation where one has more evidence than the other, but each one of those positions can be arrived at rationally, even in the fact that one doesn't have more evidence than the other.
So why do you believe okay, so well, do you think the evidence that supports God is rational?
So there's different ways that you can arrive at it. One of the simplest ways that I like is actually I call it the argument from composites. It comes from Thomas Aquinas' work On Being and Essence. And the idea is that when you look at a thing, for example, you and I, we're made of parts. I've got hair, eyes, nose, teeth, cells. It's all divisible into different parts.
Yeah.
And because of that, I am dependent on those parts existing in order for myself to exist. For example, if cells and matter and space and time didn't exist, I couldn't exist.
Yeah.
So because of that, I'm dependent on those priors. Those things are ontologically prior to me. And we can keep further subdividing until we get to the most simplistic physical thing you can think of that can't be further subdivided, whether that's space, whether that's science, like whatever you're thinking of. But the problem is there is still one more division that can be made. The fact that it exists. So you have this physical thing plus existence.
Yeah.
Well, you then make one more division, and now you're only left with existence itself.
Yeah.
That can't be further divided. That existence itself is what I understand to be God.
So wait, what do you? All right, repeat that last part for me real quick.
Yeah. So existence itself, that thing that can't be further subdivided, that everything gets divided into essentially. That is what we mean, or what I mean when I say God. That
so you don't. So you're basically saying like you're not really describing God as like a person, but like more of like I don't know how to like put it in words.
Yeah, so the type of belief that I hold to is what's called classical theism. This theological system arose during the Middle Ages between the 12th and 14th century, maybe a little bit earlier. And you had people like Moses Maimonides, who is a Jewish rabbi. You had Islamic thinkers like Avicenna and Al-Ghazali, who continued in this tradition. And then the most famous individual within this tradition is, Thomas Aquinas. And their idea of God is this being that is purely simple, pure existence. It's very different from the way you'll find a lot of modern Christians talking about God. And that's the position, or that's the position that I hold, is like, so it's going to be a very different understanding, but it's not a new understanding. It's actually one of the oldest understandings of God within the Abrahamic faith.
So your belief is that like what God is essentially it's just pure existence, basically.
Yes.
Okay. So why do we have to have? Well, why do you put a term over this, like just existence? Why don't we just call it existence in the first place?
So the term God is a title, like king is a title. So it's kind of like asking, well, if we already have a term for leader, why are you calling your leader king? Why are you calling your leader president? It's a title to the grounding of reality. And God refers to whatever that is, whatever that grounding of reality is. That's what the term God is referencing. Now, as far as like the nature of God, that's a different question. And that's where the argument that I used is showing is like, hey, so we can realize that the grounding of all of reality is existence. Yeah. And because God is the term we use to designate that which is the grounding of all reality, we're going to apply the title God to that.
Yeah, so basically what you're saying is existence is, we can give the title existence God, but the behavioral aspects of God can be like, are not like yet decided, right?
We talk about like the omni traits of like God being omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent.
Yeah, all that.
Yeah, so that's going to be dependent on, again, the different theological traditions that one subscribes to. So for like my particular theological tradition, we use what's called negative theology or negative language. What that means is that once we get to this purely simple thing of pure existence, we can't add any attributes onto it, because as soon as we do, it's no longer existence purely. It's now existence plus power, existence plus presence, existence plus whatever, right? So the omni traits aren't a literal attribute that God possesses, but it's more of a description or an analogy of how we experience God. But because we can't describe a thing without breaking it down into parts. And like we talked about, God can't be further broken down into further parts.
Yeah.
We end up speaking analogously. So when we say that God has knowledge, while it might be proper to say that God has knowledge, it's not the same thing as us having knowledge. It's not our kind of knowledge, but it seems similar to it. So it's an equivocation to say that God has knowledge, because that's adding a part onto him.
All right. I actually find this topic interesting, and I don't really think I have an argument against like believing like how you described it. I do think that is rational to how you got there and how you believe that. So, you have a blessed day, all right?
You too. Thank you for coming up. That was pleasant. Looks like we got one more, but thank you everyone who's been joining in. Thank you for the follows. Welcome, Lizzie. Glad you could make it. Let's see. Looks like we got EJ. Or is he no longer in? Doesn't look like he's in. There we go.
What's up, man?
It's going well. How about with you?
Hey, I'm doing all right. Are you the Catholic thinker that I hear referenced on Ian's lives?
Yes.
Well, then I know I'm just out of my depth, but I'm going to try my hand at you anyway. If for no other reason than just to refine my argument against a wedding stone.
Okay.
Rather than speak it out loud, this one is much more likely to be interacted with if it's put in the comments. I have put it in the comments.
Yeah, so is it okay to slaughter infants? Sometimes, always, never. So yeah, my response to that is it's never okay to slaughter infants as the end goal in and of itself. Catholic thought has something called the principle of double effect. So, you know, to kind of use a parallel that I know some people might not agree with the connection being made, you know, regardless if you're pro-life or pro-choice, I think that if the mother's life is in danger, it is perfectly valid, even for a pro-life individual, to say that the mother can take the actions necessary to preserve her own life, even if it results in the death of her infant. So in that situation, you know, we'd say in that situation, it's okay to slaughter the infant, but it's not because slaughtering the infant is the end goal or the desired outcome. It is the unintended consequence of the actual desired goal, which is preserving the life of the mother.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
Yeah, so that's so while it is true that it is never okay to slaughter infants, it doesn't mean that there is never a situation where the effect of slaughtering an infant is present. Is not like it is. There can be a situation where it is permissible for that effect to be present, as long as that's not the intended goal.
Okay, well, that seems to jive real well with the abortion argument, but I'm talking about 1 Samuel 15:3.
Yeah.
And I believe the goal then was to unalive the Amalekites, even the infants. I don't think that was that a byproduct of something, or was that the goal?
So for the slaughter of the Amalekites, I was actually talking with someone who's a practicing Jew, and she was telling me that within the understanding within her religion and the way that they understand that particular passage, the Amalekites are not an actual historical people. The Amalekites never existed. So the Amalekites were a type. They were a literary reference to indicate the sinfulness, or what the Jewish faith, what the Israelite community should seek to avoid doing.
Well, you
And
understand that the average Christian isn't going to bite that bullet and admit that the Amalekites were never real, because then they'd have to admit that something in the Bible was a lie.
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily call it a lie, but like I bite that bullet even with like the Genesis creation account. I also think that the flood, while it happened, wasn't a global one. I think it was a local one. You know, and even St. Augustine talks about how he still calls it the literal reading of the text. But what he means by literal reading of the text is what was the message that the author was intending to convey, and what is the teaching that God is trying to preserve. So it doesn't have to be a literal historical text. Now, you are correct. A lot of Christians hold to a very different understanding of what is meant by divine inspiration, where it's almost like God dictated the text, but that's not a required idea to hold within the Catholic faith.
Okay, interesting. I appreciate you.
Yeah, and like I said, like your argument and the reason why Ian, Justin, and a lot of the others in the deconstruction, or unapologetic community do very well with that argument is because like you said, the common Christian isn't going to want to bite that bullet, but I don't think it's a crazy bullet to bite. But that's their problem at that point.
You've earned your name, Catholic thinker. I understand why you have Catholic first, but I'd propose that you change it to thinking Catholic, but I'm no one to tell you what to do.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, man. I appreciate you. I respect your openness to new ideas. That's a diamond in the rough of Christianity.
It's sad, but what I will say is what I think part of it is this type of platform. It doesn't do well to encourage the ones that truly are open. Like I would say that people like Bishop Barron is someone that I greatly respect, and I find a lot of wisdom in his writings. But you're not going to find him scrolling through TikTok, calling into debate shows like this. But I think it's kind of like a self-selecting environment, unfortunately. But the unfortunate thing is it's still far more prevalent than I would like it to be.
That's a good descriptor, self-selecting. I like that. All right, man, I'm going to let you roll, but thanks for the chat.
Absolutely. You have a good one.
I'll catch you by proxy in the other lives.
Yeah, I think I'm going to try to show up on Unapologetic Sunday. I've got something I want to run by the hosts.
Well, I'll hear you then.
All right.
All right, see you, man.
See ya. All right, we got another guest. I think I might just stick to doing it over the phone because it's getting a lot more activity, but we'll see. Hey, Ape Enthusiast.
Yes, I guess I wanted to ask you a few things. The first things I wanted to ask you about is how do you feel about arguments against like classical theism, like modal collapse arguments and like aloneness arguments?
Those aren't really necessarily arguments against classical theism per se. So like the modal collapse argument, I was re-looking at the 5 ways because I was trying to look up something else, and I noticed something that I hadn't noticed until this most recent read-through. Thomas Aquinas describes almost 2 types of necessities. He talks about it is possible for a thing to be necessary yet receive its necessity from something else. And then there's the second type of necessity, which is where it receives its necessity from itself. Like it doesn't get its necessity from something else. So for like Thomas Aquinas, he doesn't necessarily, it seems like he doesn't see a problem with modal collapse. He would basically say that like, because the way that Thomas Aquinas approaches a lot of it and the way that I approach it is you have the necessity of the modal logic systems where it's impossible to be different. The way that Thomas Aquinas and I tend to approach it is we're okay if that's the case where it's impossible for something to be different. What we're concerned with is about dependency. And so a contingent is something that is dependent on something, and then something that is independent would be necessary. And so because of that, modal collapse stating that everything is impossible to be different, that's fine. That's not something that we're necessarily concerned with, or at least I'm not necessarily concerned with. And I don't have a problem with everything having to be the way that it is currently, especially when you start getting into God being perfect and always doing the most perfect thing. And then you were talking, the other issue, I think it was God being alone.
Yeah, the aloneness arguments. But I mean, before we move off, I just wanted to quickly say that I'm pretty sure that one of the tenets of, or maybe tenets isn't the right word, but one of the these principles of classical theism is that God could have possibly God could have not created. Like, I think it's a satiety. Like, he doesn't necessarily create.
So
I think that's kind of the tension with the modal collapse.
Yeah. So the way that I understand it is more of like the way to understand, like, because the universe itself, like, let me put it to you this way: because the universe exists, it necessarily exists. So is it possible for it to have been different due to the fact of its existence? No. But at the same time, you could still say it is possible for the universe to not exist and for there to never be nothing. So it's necessary in one sense, but it's still contingent in another sense. The impossibility of it not existing is due to it contradicting to our observed reality, but there's nothing inherently contradictory. Like, there being a non-world is still a modal possibility, even if, due to the fact that the universe does exist, everything that follows from it necessarily exists from it. And so due to that, I feel like there's a similar parallel to the God question, where, like, because God did choose to create, everything necessarily follows from it. But if he didn't choose to create, then, that's still a possibility. But because that wasn't within his goal, and that wasn't, everything necessarily flows from that.
So I guess we're talking about, like, you're kind of saying, given that God has created the world is necessary, right? But, like, the given that part is what's doing the heavy lifting there. Like, it could not have been given that the universe existed, right? Or do you not think? Like, do you think that it's necessary that we have, given that the universe exists, like, that is necessarily true?
So given that so that's what I was saying earlier. It's like, given that the universe does exist, it necessarily follows from God.
Yeah.
But it is still possible that the universe doesn't, or that the universe didn't exist. And in that situation, that still would follow necessarily. And so it's like, you have two necessary systems, so to speak, that are both as logically possible as the other, but the only reason why one is the case and one isn't is because we're observing the state of it.
Okay. I guess the way that I'm trying to think of what you're saying is that, like, A implies, like, or I guess maybe, how do I say this?
Where if A is the sufficient reason for B, the presence of A leads.
Yeah, kind of like a modus ponens. Necessarily, A implies B.
Yeah.
A therefore B. But, like, I understand what you're saying, or what you're saying when you say that the A implies B. That's necessary. Like, given that A, it is necessarily the case that we have B. But A might not be necessary. God's will or God's decision to create the universe isn't necessary. Even though like the conditional is necessary, that if then there is creation, right? That's different from like that being necessary is different from his decision to create being necessary. So I guess the argument wants to say that the A is also necessary. Not like you're saying the conditional is necessary, and then the modal collapse argument would want to say that the condition is necessary and the antecedent is necessary. And so we have to have this world. We couldn't possibly have not had this world. Like to what we're given, like regardless of.
Yeah. Modal logic is something I'm still learning through because I'm most of my studies, in fact, almost all of it was on classical logic, and so I'm trying to, still learning how they relate to each other. But the more that I study, it almost seems like Thomas Aquinas, if you presented modal collapse to him, would just kind of shrug his shoulders and say, "So, that's fine." I'm concerned about dependency and independency.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I guess I don't want to dwell on it for too long, but did you have thoughts on the aloneness argument?
Yeah. So you might have, if you were listening to the previous guest, he asked if I was someone who's made regular appearances to allegedly Ian's show. If you're not already following them, I recommend it. But Ian runs that argument about like God being alone a lot. And in classical theism, we're okay biting the bullet saying, no, it wasn't the case that there was ever where you could ever say that like God was alone. God was eternally emanating or creating reality. And we personally believe that there was a first moment, which we call a beginning, but it's not like a theory of time where there was no time and then time started to exist. It's Thomas Aquinas, when he was describing God's relation to time, was very, very similar to B theory of time. In fact, I was already holding to some version of B theory of time growing up, even before I learned what B theory was. Because for Thomas Aquinas, the beginning moment of all of reality and this present moment are equally real to God, just as this moment is real to us. So the first moment always existed for God, and he was always emanating that moment. So there was never a case where he was alone.
Okay, yeah, I'm just trying to think. I don't think that, the aloneness argument that I'm talking about isn't about at some point God being alone. It's about the possibility that God could have been alone. And it's specifically targeted against like divine simplicity. And I do have to go, but I'll just kind of explain the argument, and then I'll head out, and maybe I'm not sure. Maybe I'll try and like stick around in the comments so I can hear, but I do have to get going. But yeah, so it's the argument.
So if you want to check out my YouTube
You said what?
channel, and listen to my response after you, that'll work.
Okay. But yeah, so the one that I'm talking about, the alone doesn't exist alone. At some point, it's more about the possibility that God would have existed alone, and it's targeted towards divine simplicity, kind of ideas of God. And it just says like if God could have possibly existed alone, then his knowledge that he exists alone would be intrinsic to himself, but it would also be contingent, right? And he's not supposed to have any like intrinsic or I have intrinsic truths. Or sorry, shit, that was intrinsic truth. He can only have extrinsic contingent truths. But yeah, that's pretty much the argument. Sorry if it's really loud, but I'll listen to your response. I'll be in the comments.
Okay. Yeah. So someone tried to run this argument to me on Monday, And within classical theism, the understanding of like the omni traits, like God's knowledge, it's not that like God actually possesses knowledge in the way that we would understand it. And so because of that, you know, the way that it's, when we're trying to talk about like God having knowledge, we're talking it via analogy. It's almost like equivocating something that we have onto God that God doesn't have. So as far as like, you know, God, if God was alone, he would know that he's alone. But if he isn't alone, he would also know that he isn't alone. Therefore, his knowledge is dependent on external factors. So that's the equivocation part. It is the case that like God appears to us as if he has knowledge of us, but that's us trying to describe what is indescribable. The way that I like to describe divine simplicity is it's almost like the H.P. Lovecraft cosmic horrors. You have this entity that is so far beyond human comprehension that when a human being saw it, he was unable to actually describe what was going on. And what's being written about is the best attempt at describing the indescribable. And so the omni traits is us doing the same thing. Aristotle talks about how the way that we come to knowledge is you have a thing and you break it down. Or you start adding on to the thing. Well, if God is this purely simple being who is purely existence, then we can't break it down. So the only thing we can do is start adding on to it. But as soon as we start adding on to it, it's no longer this divinely simple thing. So it's all done analogously. And the aloneness problem, I think, is what occurs when you try to equivocate human knowledge to the divine knowledge, because the divine knowledge is not the same as our knowledge. But we've got another guest coming up. Let's see if they're coming up. It doesn't look like it. Lestriel, good to see you again. I haven't heard the term apophatic theology, so I'm not sure. Let's see. Oh, negative theology. Yeah. No, I think that's about the only way that we can talk about God. Because of the fact that God was only this simple thing, as soon as we start trying to speak positively on it beyond that he exists and that his essence is existence, those are about the two only positive things we can talk about his nature. And so everything else is either needs to be an analogy or negating an aspect. So like when we say that God is infinite, we mean that he is not finite. So that's actually a negative, that's a negation. So that's a negative theology. Exactly, Abe. The only thing we can only do is understand God by saying what he is not. But had a lot of good faith guests so far. That makes me excited. Let's see. I've been in the church since birth. I'm a cradle Catholic. I was baptized, I want to say like 1 or 2. I know my mom mentioned that me and my brothers were baptized pretty late. Interestingly enough, I was actually confirmed in the Byzantine Rite. Long story short, my mother was trying to find a priest to baptize my, at the time, youngest brother, and there was a retired Byzantine bishop in the area that a friend of hers was going to, so she went as well. He baptized and confirmed my brother, and when he learned that I was baptized already, went ahead and confirmed me. So I've had the gifts of the Holy Spirit since I was like 3 years old. When I was like 4, my mother was saying that I was already talking about how I wanted to be a priest. And by the time I was 6, I distinctly remember thinking, you know, if I am going to be a priest, I better learn the faiths that I'm going to be teaching to the people. So I have been exhaustively studying the faith ever since then. So I've been studying the faith well over 20 years at this point. Let's see. But thank you everyone for the likes and the follows. It means a lot. Let's see. But let's see. But yeah, as you all heard mention, I'm planning, if you haven't already, like I would recommend checking out Unapologetic as well. It's hosted by allegedly Ian, Dr. Blitz, and Justin from Deconstruction Zone. It's honestly a very dangerous trio for theists to go up, because you got a guy who knows the Bible very well. I don't know if Justin would be qualified as a biblical scholar, but he's basically a biblical scholar. Dr. Blitz is a physicist, and allegedly Ian is very well versed in philosophy. So it doesn't matter what approach someone tries to come, they're going to be running up against an expert. But I'm planning on running an argument that I've been working on. I know it's not perfect or anything, but I just want to get their thoughts on it and see what areas I need to focus on. But I've gotten to the point where we've arrived at, where it arrives at the a singular necessary being that exists, whose identity is existence itself. Yep, that's the problem with ancient history, is it's based on probabilistic information and very hard to get to anything like actually fully confirmed 100% without any probabilistic data. Let's see. But yeah, if anyone's watching that doesn't think that God is rational, or even just wants to come out to have a conversation, feel free to join. For the purpose of this conversation, it's just more of God as a concept. But Miguel, if you have a question as far as like a particular Catholic dogma or doctrine, I'd be more than happy to answer the question. I'm not going to attempt to prove Catholicism is true. I don't think that's something that can easily be done in a conversation like this. I'm much more like confident in being able to show that God is rational. But I am working on a book that I would hope to publish one day, where it starts by demonstrating that God exists, showing that there actually is a God, and then showing that it's rational to be Catholic, and that Catholicism is, if not the most rational position to hold, at least a rational position to hold. DW, what I would recommend is he never said it, the quote of St. Francis of Assisi: preach the gospel at all times, and if necessary, use words. So just live your life as a good Christian believer, and it'll happen. It happened with my girlfriend and her family. She converted to the faith and joined Easter last year, and then her mom joined this past Easter, and her father's going to finish up his sacraments and get confirmed this month. And it wasn't because of me preaching or anything. It was just me and my family living as the best Catholics as we could. So, Jess, as I was saying, like, that is a very long walkthrough. I would there is a video that is on my YouTube channel where I talk about that in it's like a 3-hour long podcast where I go through that. But the steps of it are effectively, I go through to determine if there is a God. Then I determine its nature. Then I determine if we have reasonable reasons to conclude that this thing interacted with history. And if it did interact with history, who did he interact with? And once we've determined who he interacted with, we just continue on from there. And by following those steps, for me at least, it leads to the Catholic Church. I might have read on phenomenology, but the term isn't striking any bells. So if you can explain what specifically you're wondering, Phi Heaven or Five Heaven. Looks like we got a guest.
Afternoon, how are you?
I'm doing good. How about yourself?
Oh, getting along, yeah.
Good to hear. What brings you up?
Well, I think that's an interesting prompt. As far as I've understood it, the belief in God is irrational, and that's not a problem. I don't remember who, but I've heard philosophers say that, like traditionalists, I think they'll say something like that rationality, that this sort of obsession with rationality is a product of the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment is sort of a devolution when it comes to human thinking towards the divine or the luminescent or transcendent or non-corporeal, and that somehow or another, in the end, faith, in other words, irrationality, is superior to rationality, or that instinct is man's instinct toward the divine, which is irrational, is superior to rationality. Because, of course, people will always argue that that you can't rationalize a good God in an evil world, the famous problem of evil,
Mm-hmm.
that A good God couldn't create such a state of affairs, and in the end, after all the talking and debating, it winds up to be a mystery, which is irrational. That's the discourse as far as I've understood it. So I'm interested what you have to say about a rational God.
Yeah. So the way that I understand, rationality and being rational is just using reason rightly. I mentioned earlier today that just because someone uses rationality or reason to arrive to a conclusion doesn't necessarily mean that the conclusion is the correct conclusion. An example I like to use is when you look to the realm of science. The question of, does the universe have a beginning, or is there an infinite past? And you have scientists of varying different opinions on the matter, but they all can point to a rational reason based on the available evidence to them on why they hold that conclusion. And there isn't anything that is in error with their thinking. They aren't making any logical fallacies, and the inferences that they're using are valid inferences. So the first thing to understand is that when I say that belief in God is rational, it's not the same as saying it is true that God exists, or belief in God is a true belief. It's just, it is a rational belief. And as far as the idea of like one requires faith to get to God, my understanding of faith is not where it is in opposition to rationality. If your best friend said, hey man, I need to borrow $500 from you, but I promise I'll pay you back on Friday. This is the very first time that they've asked you to borrow money. So you have no prior experience other than the fact that they are your friend, that they will indeed give the money back. And so you give them the money back, or you give them the $500, and you believe in them because of the friendship and all of these other things that point towards you, that they will give it back to you on Friday. So what faith is it's a form of trust, specifically in regards to that the promise of, at least within the Catholic perspective, that the promise of Christ that he will return and is preparing a place for us in heaven are true. That's the faith that's being described within the Catholic tradition. The Catholic Church believes that one can use natural logic, natural reason, rationality to arrive at the conclusion that there is a God. And then you brought up about the mystery of like the problem of evil. There's also like the Trinity. The way that the Catholic Church understands the term mystery, a mystery is something that we hold to be true that cannot be arrived at by natural reason alone, but it's not contrary to natural reason. So what I mean by that is, a child doesn't understand the, quantum mechanics. The idea of a particle, a solid piece of matter, is also a wave, something that acts differently than a solid piece of matter. And so for them, it's a mystery. But we know that quantum mechanics doesn't violate the laws of logic and the laws of reality, even if we don't fully understand how it does. So that's the situation there. That's the best analogy I can do as far as like how I understand mystery. So as far as like, the belief in God is rational, all I mean is that one, based on available evidence, one can use logic and reason to arrive to the conclusion that there is a God that exists.
Maybe mainly because of I don't remember the name of it. The argument that you can't get something out of nothing. Ex nihilo,
Yeah,
nihilo fit, whatever it is.
yeah. I don't know if there is an actual name, but a common critique against this was actually a very common critique against the idea of God in the Christian understanding, was that you can't create something out of nothing. And it was a critique of the dogma of creation ex nihilo. Thomas Aquinas has a way of responding to that critique. And nowadays theists have kind of flipped it towards the atheists. So both sides agree you can't get something from nothing, but the answer to that aspect of you can't get something from nothing is different from the two sides.
Right. Yeah, I mean it's an interesting idea. I've not that it means anything, but I've been interested in these sorts of things for a very long time, and I've been listening to people having their debates. And yep, the conclusion I've come up with is that God, the metaphysic, the eternal, the whatever it's called, the transcendent, the illuminescent, the divine. I mean, I don't think there's a damn thing that's rational about it. I really don't see how one goes with the other. And like I say, I think I've heard mystics, for lack of a better word, Christian or Jewish or Islamic or Hindu, say as much, and something to the effect of, yeah, it's just a leap of faith at the end. Yeah.
Yeah, I somewhat disagree with that. You know, and you know, I take the classical approach here, which the idea behind it is, you know, if there is a God, and if this God created us as we are, then he gave us our human knowledge, or not our human knowledge, our human mind that is capable of rational thought, that is capable of logical thought. And because of the way that they understood the way that things work, they believed in something that's called telos. But effectively what that just means is that an acorn contains within it all of the stuff that it needs in order to become an oak tree, as opposed to it becoming a cat. And so the claim is that if it gave us knowledge, or it gave us the ability to be rational, then the rationality of humanity has to be able to help orient us towards something, and from that orientation, it is able to help point us towards our end. And if God is our end, then it ought to be able to help point us towards God. So therefore, we can come to the knowledge that there is a God through rationality. Now, what I just provided is not an argument to show that God exists. It's just more of to show that the question of if there is a God or not ought to be able to be answered through human rationality.
You're right. Yeah. I just don't know how far we can. I love what you're saying. I enjoy what you're talking about, and I encourage you to continue. When I get into the nitty gritty of it, I mean that's the yeah. I mean it just doesn't seem very rational to me. I mean the idea that whatever, you know, all these critiques people make. What is it? Jesus sacrificing himself on the cross. Why would I heard a Muslim guy say this the other day. What did he say? He said
a blood sacrifice to appease himself and send himself to appease himself. That type of thing.
Yeah, something like that. But if what did he say? He said it so well. It's something like if I commit a crime,
Mm-hmm.
and then my brother is punished for it. Am I free to go? I think he said something like that. I went, yeah, 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 yeah. I think I agree. Yeah, just things like that. I mean, things like you say, the Trinity, or yeah, just things like that. They've got to be leaps of faith. It just not does not seem very logical or reasonable to me. And that's not to put the faith down at all. But yeah, I mean, it just doesn't seem logical or reasonable at all.
Yeah,
To
and
my mind.
and I know it for a lot of people that is the case. And what I would, and this isn't to put down anyone, but time is a finite resource. Like, we all only have a finite amount of time, and we ought to put that time into things that we care about. And if one doesn't necessarily care about resolving the nitty-gritty issues, then I don't blame them for not wanting to put the time into that. Like, that's not their responsibility, and that's not something that they have to do. Um, I would just say that, like, just because something doesn't seem rational doesn't mean that it necessarily is irrational. But at the same time, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, you need to go and do the research to discover if it actually is rational or not. If it's not something that interests you, more power to you. Like, do what interests you. Go after what excites you. We only have so
Oh
many
yeah,
lives.
yeah. I mean, it's not that it doesn't interest me. I mean, it interests me very much, but I give up. I give. I mean, I mean, because you'll get caught up in this project of trying to prove God exists, and that if God exists, okay, which one, and all of that, and it's damned endless. I heard there's a comedian named Pete Holmes, I think his name is, and he turns out to be pretty profound. He said something like, he's a Christian. He said. The reason you can't do that is because it's like Harry Potter looking for evidence of J.K. Rowling within a Harry Potter book. It just good luck. You're not going to be. You can't get there from here, and you just give up the whole project. I mean, that's how I feel about it. I can't deny that there's got to be something spooky or metaphysical going on around here with all we know about astrophysics and quantum physics and just the oddness that existence is here to begin with. But yeah, I mean, I think I could spend 1,000 lifetimes trying to prove that God exists, and I'll never be able to do it. It just, yeah, I don't know if that's the right way to go.
Interests you then? I think this is the correct term for it. There's, it's either igtheism or agnotheism. I forget which one it is, but I think igtheism is the one that says that it is impossible to know if a God exists or not. So I would recommend checking out, looking into igtheism, because that sounds almost like what you're describing, that like, hey, look, the very question of like if God exists is just completely unknowable to us. Like, there's no way for us to be able to know the answer to this question.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I enjoy listening to people like Bishop Fulton Sheen or somebody like that, because there does seem to be, a rationality and a logic. And what are those great words you were using? Logos and telos and these sort of things.
Telos. It's it's just classical terminology coming from the Greek philosophers. It's like, if you study like Aristotle and you start learning about his how he understood causality, that's going to be like within the first class. So it's not like this super secret or a sign of someone having advanced knowledge. It's just, something that I went into and was studying and, just know of. I'm sure that like in your experience, like whatever industry you work in, something that you learned on day one, but I would have no clue that even is a thing. So, don't put yourself down when someone else knows something different than you. You know different things than them as well.
No, sure. I like their train of logic. Something like what? Jesus is the Logos. The Logos is truth, and you can get to the truth, the ultimate truth with a capital T,
Mhm.
through Jesus, something like that. Don't they work that way? Don't they think that way?
Kind of. So the idea is that so logos is the word, but Jesus does say, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." And so the argument goes, even if you are ignorant of Jesus, even if you are ignorant of who Jesus is as the Son of God, if you are striving for truth, and you are striving for capital T truth, like you are trying to understand truth and reality, then what you are actually striving for is Jesus, even if you don't know that what you're striving for is Jesus.
Right. Yeah. Well, thanks for the conversation. I sure appreciate it.
Absolutely. Looks like my sister just joined.
All right. Well, all the best. I'll listen in. Thank you.
Absolutely. Let's see. Atomics. I think it's possible to be rational to be other denominations as well. The reason why I say that is, like I was saying, just because someone uses logic and reason to arrive to a conclusion doesn't necessarily mean that the conclusion is correct. It just means that it wasn't based on emotion. It wasn't based on flawed reasoning. It just means that using logic and reason was the path that one used to get to the conclusion. And then, Zekles, I did see your question about if atheism is the original definition of agnosticism. Agnosticism is understood as the statement of, I don't know, so I'm not making a judgment. Atheism is, it is impossible to know. So they're making a judgment on the fact that the question itself has no way to arrive at the answer. Looks like we got another guest.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing good. How about yourself?
Doing good, thanks.
What brings you up?
I am an atheist. I was scrolling by.
Okay.
I did want to ask one question in regards to Catholicism. I did some research recently. I'm from India. We had the Goa Inquisition. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I am not.
Okay, essentially, like the Portuguese came. Unfortunately, they unalived a lot of my ancestors, destroyed temples in the name of Christ. Just wondering if is that scriptural by any chance?
So I would need to know the very particulars on it, but
Yeah.
The answer that I would give, just as a general answer, is no. When you look at the way that, like, for example, St. Paul went out and did his ministry, and the way that the other apostles went out and did their ministry, is they just went out and they lived among the people, preaching in the Jewish synagogues first, because the idea was that they were the firstborn, so they deserved to hear the news first. And then after that, they would go live among the people, help the people, heal the people. And once they got the interest of the people, started teaching the people. They didn't go in to destroy temples or anything like that.
Yeah.
What happened for a lot of the different inquisitions that I'm familiar with is you had effectively what was going on was Jim Crow laws. And I don't know how familiar you are with American history, but
Yeah.
okay. You effectively had Jim Crow laws, lynching, and that type of stuff going on to people who were suspected of not being Catholic, or let me rephrase that, who claimed to be Catholic but were not actually practicing Catholics. And
Okay.
so what was going on was, because of these lynch mobs were occurring, the church put forth an investigative team that was called the Inquisition. And the team would then go in, look at the evidence, investigate, interrogate the individuals, and then present their findings to the king, and the king would make a judgment. From what you're describing, sounds very much like colonialism, where people were coming in and doing something very similar to like what happened with the Crusades. It is my opinion for the Crusades that, you know, the Pope was right to call for a crusade to help rescue what was going on in the Holy Lands.
Right.
But the political kings and soldiers took advantage of that just cry for help to further their own agenda, which turned into this ugly, evil thing that came out. So, you know, what happened with your people and your ancestors,
Yeah.
no, from the way that you're describing it, no, that is not the way that it should have occurred.
Okay. Okay. And I can definitely give lenience for the Crusades because you did have a lot of Muslims coming in, and they were pushing up to Europe at the time, so it does make sense to fight back. But in regards to the Goa Inquisition, like just like you said, if they let's say they converted, but they were still practicing different rituals, they were punished for doing so. Oftentimes, it was very brutal punishment, and that's something it didn't stick right with me because when I read the Bible, I didn't come across any passages where that was actually justified, right?
Yeah, and like the idea of like the punishment, like when you look at like the question of the death penalty within church history, you know, even before Pope Francis changed the catechism, you had Pope John Paul II talking about, hey, we ought to be working to where we never need to use the death penalty, but the death penalty is a last resort to preserve the safety of society. And the idea behind it is just like how it can be just to kill in self-defense. The death penalty is that right and ability to defend oneself extended to the community and to the society. But it ought to always be a last resort. And unfortunately, you have a lot of people throughout history who used it as a first resort as opposed to the last resort. And that's where the abuses and harm came from.
Okay. Okay. If this was to happen in 2026, we would definitely take a step back, correct? I think social media has really changed the way that we understand things. And even if it was, like you mentioned, the Jim Crow laws, if it was, the Jim Crow laws were very unjust. I can't lie.
Yeah.
They were very segregational, they were racist, and that was just wrong. Wouldn't Christ have wanted equality amongst his people, not necessarily like segregation?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and we even see that hinted at in one of the letters of Paul of there is no man or woman, Jew or Gentile, slave or free, that all are equal in the eyes of God. And that there's arguments being made that understanding kind of helped formulate and lay the groundwork for the Enlightenment, where it started to talk about human rights and human equality and things like that. Because before then you had this idea of like a king has this inherent value inherent to him that is different from a slave. Like people had this qualitative aspect to them that made one greater or lesser than another. And so with that, yes, absolutely. Like Christ would want us to be treating each other as neighbors, as he describes it. And because of that, the way that society has historically acted is not in treating people not of their tribe as a neighbor, and that leads to this turmoil and this conflict that you see. And yeah, absolutely. Like when that doesn't happen, I don't believe that that's in line with the message of Christ.
And I think that's why I have more of an atheistic position. If we have the Son of God come give us the word that's inspired by the Lord, and we're unable to follow through with it, we're fallible humans that mess it up. It just makes me lose that faith of a all-powerful God, like waiting and commanding these things. You know, it doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, and you know the divine hiddenness I know is a very, very hard question to respond to, and I know there's a lot of people who are desperate for God to reveal Himself, and so the divine hidden is a real problem and challenge and painful topic. I do believe that there is an answer to it, but I don't think it's respectful to the pain that they're feeling to try to provide an answer in this detached state. The best way that I can do that, in my opinion, the best way I can answer that question, in my opinion, is be the presence of Christ in their life for them, as opposed to try to give this abstract, rational, logical answer that doesn't help anyone.
Okay, that was pretty good. I appreciate your conversation.
Absolutely.
God bless
Thank
you.
you.
Take care.
All right. Thank you for everyone to come in. Yeah, Goatman, I think you were about the only person that I was seeing that was somewhat active that I trusted with mods, so I just kind of did it in the middle of the live. Let's see. We got Glitch in the queue. Let's see if he comes up. No. No, looks like he left. But oh, wait. There we go. There we go.
Hiya, bud.
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah, pretty good. If I disconnect, it's because my phone's died.
Okay. Do I pronounce it as Museko?
Mew is fine.
Mew? Okay. What brings you up today?
Just wanted to say I'm 32. My family are all atheists. I got baptized like a few months ago, so now I'm like a Christian and everything. So I'm just sort of on my journey, you know.
Okay. Well, welcome.
Yeah, it's pretty good. So do you just take any questions or?
Yeah, so this is mostly for people who disagree with the prompt of, belief in God is rational, but I'm not opposed to answering questions, especially if it helps bring forth conversation.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I believe belief in God is rational. I think if anybody's ever been very ill or if anybody's ever had some really troubling times, I think you do start to turn to faith, if not God. So, like I've been really ill in the past and I just started crying out to God and stuff, even though I wasn't a Christian. And I think, if people like don't believe their whole life and then, they want to like turn to God in the end when they're really ill or something, for whatever reason, then that's a bit of a shame to have sort of lived your life without sort of recognizing that,
Yeah, so the name of that is actually No Atheist in a Foxhole. Describing the phenomenon of where when all seems lost, people will turn to anything, even God in that situation to help them through that.
No
I know
atheist in a foxhole.
Yeah, no atheist in a foxhole is the saying.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that, probably most people, if they had time, in the end and stuff, they'll probably, like say prayers or turn to God or try and speak in their head to at least some sort of creator or something. So, I doubt there's people who are hard atheists that are in really dire situations,
Oh, I'm sure that there are that would still remain. And while that is a real phenomenon, and I do believe that the faith and the conversion that occurs in a situation like that is real. Like that is one that is inspired by fear and emotion. Therefore, it doesn't fit the terminology of rational, but that doesn't make it less of a real conversion or a real faith. Like someone can, like it is my belief that someone can come to believe in God for an irrational reason, and then over time develop a rational understanding of it. So it is perfectly fine as a first step or a first approach to it. Just like how someone can deconstruct from the faith because of an emotional response, like the Catholic Church priest abuse scandal. A lot of people left the faith because of that. And that was due to a very emotional response that happened. And over time, they were then able to use a rational justification for why the Catholic Church isn't true. And so, yeah, like, I do believe that belief in God is rational. What you described can be a starting off point. I wouldn't call that a rational starting off point, but it doesn't mean that it's a bad starting off point.
Okay, yeah, I appreciate what you're saying. I would say that in the context of having sort of capacity and sort of normal ways of experiences in things, but I think it's quite well known that you can't really rationalize your own sort of ceasing to exist. So maybe it's like hard to sort of say whether that's rational or irrational.
We all do have a to some extent or another, in different degrees, a fear of our own mortality. And that can be a driving factor for a belief in God. It's still kind of the same thing. So to me, what I understand rational to mean is arrived at via the use of logic and reason, not emotion. And when you're describing these situations of like, hey, someone came to faith because of, fear of their own mortality, that's an emotional response. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, again, to be very clear, like someone can have this emotional response and it lead them to that. And then they continue exploring their journey, just like there's nothing wrong with, is for those in the audience and chat who aren't believers, who deconstructed themselves, there's nothing wrong with, and they would agree with it, nothing wrong with leaving the faith because of an emotional response and then arriving to the conclusion rationally after the fact on why the faith is false. The reverse is true. Someone
Yeah.
can.
I mean, I read an interesting paper saying that if we were to ever allow people in the UK to sort of allow themselves to choose to end their own suffering and things like that, have like an assisted unaliving sort of situation, that we wouldn't be able to frame that in terms of capacity, because that would be the wrong reference to use, because you can't really expect people to have capacity with regards to something like in the face of their own mortality. So I was sort of relating it there, saying, in the face of sort of mortality, then, it must be tricky to say whether you're being rational or irrational. Because I mean, even in a situation where, you may be compelled by emotions and all of that for mortality, and a lot of people might say you're being irrational. Obviously, your brain might be working overtime. You still might be thinking quite logically, but obviously it's just a mess of emotions and stuff, isn't it? So it might be the wrong frame of reference to use,
Yeah, and that's all I was just saying. It's just like there's nothing wrong with coming to the faith through an emotional response. It doesn't make the faith less or anything like that. It was just wanting to make sure to clarify my stance on what I was meaning by rational.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time when I hear sort of atheists sort of speaking, I often relate to what they're saying, but it's as if they're using a different sort of language, and then you've almost got one sort of set of language for people that believe and one sort of set of language for people who sort of follow science, almost like a religion or something. And sometimes I can see where both sides are saying the same thing, but they're using very different languages or perspectives to see through it. Do you have anything to say on that? Or?
Oh no, yeah, I absolutely agree with that 100%. And that's actually something that I'm trying to work on, is figuring out a way to bridge that divide. Those that are familiar with me can attest to the fact that I often talk about, in an almost joking way, I'm trying to translate St. Thomas Aquinas to bring his text to a more modern day vernacular in a way that is intuitively understood by people who aren't familiar with classical theism and theology and philosophy.
Yeah, because I mean, even when I read the Bible, sometimes I'll see a verse or something, and it might say God did something or something, and I can sort of see how like there's sort of truth in that as people trying to explain things that have happened, maybe anthropologically, or how like we've sort of trying to explain how we've sort of first developed language, or trying to explain how we first, the first time we sort of started to socially come together and things like this, like for example at the start of the book of John, where it's talking about, similar to in the start of Genesis, where it's talking about separation of different realms below the firmament and stuff. I sort of see that as it could be trying to explain how we first developed the word, when we first began to consciously realize there was a night and a day and stuff like that, rather than just living one sort of colored experience with no ability to sort of speak or think and stuff. Does that make sense to you? Or
Yeah. But listen, you've been great. I do have a guest up.
All right, no worries.
But it's been great talking to you.
yeah, thanks.
Yo, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Hey, sorry, the text is a little cropped. Does it say if you it says if you disagree, call in. Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. I disagree that belief in God is rational. I just want to say off the rip that it's refreshing to see somebody on live with a seemingly above room temperature IQ. I think I've enjoyed the conversation so far. So I want to hop in and get your perspective. But anyway, okay, belief in God is rational. I think a big reason why I think it's irrational is a moral argument, which can seem like an emotional argument, but it's really not. I think because it's more of an internal critique. But
Cut out for a moment there, Nick.
sorry, are you keeping up with the Tanner Horner case, for example?
I am not.
Oh, he was a FedEx driver who, like 2 years ago, kidnapped a 7-year-old girl in his truck and did every every terrible thing you could think of, and she's unalived, and there's prints of his shoe all over her body and face. I mean, it's horrific. Anyway, he got the unalive penalty just recently. I heard about it today. But my question is and you'll see where I'm going with this, but if, for example, if I knew that was happening and had the ability to prevent that from happening, would I have the moral responsibility to prevent that from happening or stop it in its tracks?
Yeah. And I'm still working through this, but this was a perspective that I got about 5 or 6 years ago. And I haven't seen other people talk about it in this way. So bear with me, because this is still unfinished, and
No, I got you. I'm not going to hold your feet to the fire.
No resources to pull from to say, hey, you can look at this. But there's several things to keep in mind, and it might be an unsatisfying answer, and I understand that, and I'm still trying to work through it and understand it myself. So for my background, I am a classical theistic theologian. I subscribe very heavily to Thomistic thought, even if I don't hold to every single thing that he said. And as part of that, God is pure existence, and his act is existence itself. His act is the same as his essence. So what God does is what exists. Now, Heidegger.
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with this sort of this line of thinking. Is there a way to put that in other words? Like, you saying that God is being a creator, like his essence is to create existence. Is that kind of the idea? Or
So the best way that I can describe it is someone unfamiliar with the metaphysical baggage of the language that I'm using is you have an apple, right? And you can talk about redness separate from the apple.
Okay.
Or God. So we are a thing that exists. God is existence. What he is existence. He isn't a thing that has existence like we have existence. Just like how red isn't a red thing, it's just red itself. God is existence itself.
Okay.
And so, because of the dogma of divine simplicity, what that entails is also that God doesn't have parts. He's just existence. And that includes his act. His act is just existence. From there, from Heidegger, he in his metaphysics, who is not a Thomist, who has nothing to do with this Thomistic thinking, but I think he provides a very beautiful insight. Non-being or nothingness is more than just the absence of a thing, because the absence of a thing is still pointing to the thing that it's absent of. So it's still a thing in some capacity. True nothingness doesn't exist. We can't even talk about it because the moment we're trying to talk about nothing, it becomes a thing.
Okay. I could see how like the concept of nothingness or empty space, but not even empty space, because that's a thing. Like nothingness is kind of inconceivable. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Like,
okay.
Because we can when we think we are orienting ourselves to a subject and nothing can't be a subject, we can't talk about nothing truly or even orient ourselves to nothing because it's not a subject to be oriented towards. So if God's being is existence itself and his act is existence itself, then what is his non-act but nothing? Non-being. So the question then becomes, is God's quote-unquote lack of action the same as our lack of action? Because our lack of action is still unaction.
Okay, so I guess going into this, like I've never heard the claim that God's I'm gonna mess this up because I've never heard this setup before. But God's exist.
Different schools of thought and
God's nature is existence. Is that kind of the idea?
God's essence is existence.
His essence is existence. So everything that happens, everything that exists is from God.
Everything that has being comes from God. Yes.
Everything that has being is the same thing as everything that exists, right? I mean,
well, there's some people who would say that, like, the reason why I'm being careful is, like, some people say that the Holocaust exists, but the Holocaust doesn't have being. It is an event that took place by individuals that have being. So, like, a verb or an action doesn't have being. It is something that a being does.
Is God, in your view, is God a being with agency and a mind, or no?
It would be an equivocation to say that. So with divine simplicity, God is just existence. So to even say that God has a mind would be to then say that God is existence plus mind, which you can't do in classical theology.
So God does not have a mind?
Not in the way that we would think of it, no.
Does God have a will?
Again, not in the way that we would think. Like, so the thing with the classical theology is you can't think of what God has. You can only talk about what God has not. And anytime you try to talk about a positive thing that God has, you're speaking via analogy. it's not something that like. So when we say that God has a mind, it's saying that when we experience the presence or action of God, to us, it has the appearance of a thing with a mind. So we say that it has a mind, even if it doesn't actually have a mind.
Interesting. I don't think I've ever met anyone with this line of thinking, or these.
You might have met some people online who claim to be Thomistic theologians, but they do such a bad job. Like I don't know if you've heard the term Philbros, where they just regurgitate and rattle off at rapid speed philosophical arguments without even understanding it themselves. Unfortunately, there's a version of that in the classical Thomistic theology view itself.
I guess I'm just talking about my whole experience growing up was through the American Protestant, non-denominational kind of, Southern Christian kind of normie, like the mega churches, you know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
And all these, I can't say all these people, but the main sort of canon in these circles is that God is a being that created everything, that is like this all-knowing, all-powerful being with agency and a will, and I wouldn't say they would say a mind, but like something that behaves like it has a mind, and it communicates with people and like makes decisions. It made a decision to flood the earth, made a decision to send his son to die on a cross, all this stuff. So, I mean, how much of that like aligns with your views of God?
So, that's going to be another thing that, like, especially for Catholicism, where we disagree with Protestants on, is how divine inspiration works. In my experience, and I'm not saying this is true for all Protestants, but in my experience, most Protestants treat the Bible as if it was divinely dictated.
Yes. Like an inerrant, divinely dictated. Like the people that were writing it were just puppets. To like, the thoughts were coming straight from God to the paper. Yep. Yes.
That is not the view in Catholicism. The view in Catholicism is very strongly supported by St. Augustine. He kind of quite literally wrote the book on how to do biblical hermeneutics. And while there's different ways to approach it, but the basic idea is the human authors were free, completely free to express the truth of salvation history, not history of humanity, not science, just salvation history in whatever way that they saw fit, whether that was as a literal historical text, an allegorical historical text, or even as a poem. I've even heard some statements that the Book of Job was a play or poetry about an actual historical figure that lived kind of along the similar veins of like George Washington and the cherry tree type situation. And as they're writing about the salvation history, God just made sure that what they wrote about the truths of salvation history were protected from error. Their cosmology could have been wrong. Their scientific understanding could have been wrong. All of these different things could have been wrong. But as long as it was related to the truth of salvation history about, God created humanity, humanity fell from God's grace, and over the course of generations, God was working with a tribe of people to prepare them for his arrival to then go to the rest of the world. That truth was preserved.
Interesting. Okay. So to me, I'm not trying to be an a-hole when I'm saying this, but this is pretty new. Like, I've not been exposed to this line of thinking.
Before you get too far, I will say that, even amongst Catholics, what I'm describing is not going to be something that you're going to encounter a lot amongst the majority of lay people. But when you get to the higher theological professors in higher apologetic community within the Catholic Church, you'll find this a little bit more common. But just amongst the lay people, this is still very rare to encounter.
To me, it seems like you have a super, the term that comes to mind is a super watered down like opinion of God compared to most Christians. Watered down in a sense of, if he's just existence, if your definition of God is basically existence, then like, okay, then by that definition, then I believe in God now. But I don't agree with any any morals presented in the Bible from God, like not any, but a lot of them, a lot of things that God just like says and does, according to a lot of Christians, I don't agree with. You're saying you don't either, because the Bible could be wrong, because the writers were free to be wrong.
It's more of like, we need to determine what the truth of the Bible is trying to convey. And, like, to use St. Augustine as an example again, he called this a literal reading of the text. He was of a position of instantaneous creation. Well, instantaneous creation is kind of like a pseudo-evolutionary theory before evolutionary theory was a thing, where everything that was needed in order for stuff to exist was created at the first moment of reality.
Sure.
And even if a dog didn't exist at that first moment of reality, all the stuff that was needed to have dogs be able to exist was present at that first
conservation of matter and energy, all the way back.
Yep. And that's not a 7-day creation period, but St. Augustine called his understanding and his interpretation the literal reading of Genesis, because he believed that was what the text was trying to convey. And so the understanding of the church is that the Bible isn't a book that you can just sit down and read on your own and know what it's trying to say. Like, can you still get a lot of knowledge and wisdom from it? Yes. But because it's not a historical text, it's about salvation history, so it's about the supernatural history. We need to be guided supernaturally to make sure that we're pulling right parallels and interpretations from it, which is why we have the magisterium and aren't purely sola scriptura.
Okay. Sounds a lot like picking and choosing, like cherry picking, to be honest. Like, do you not think that's just cherry picking and leaving out the kind of, like, of course a belief is rational when you only pick out the parts that you agree with. You know what I mean?
So so the question that you're getting at then is one that's a little bit further down the line. So the way that I tend to approach this conversation is, again, very different from the way a lot of people. I was listening to an atheist call-in, a friend of mine doing his own call-in show, and there was another Catholic that came on, and he tried to prove that God exists and isn't fictional by using the Bible, and I completely disagree with that approach. I think the right approach is to start from first foundations, as in, what do we know to be true? And then from there, we determine whether a God exists or not. And once we've determined if a God exists or not, then we can determine if we can know its nature. Once we've determined its nature, then we can see if a being with such a nature interacted with reality. And then if such a being interacted with reality, did he interact with any particular person, and was that recorded? Then we can follow those recordings in that group to then come to further conclusions. So for me, trying to figure out if Christianity, which is the question that we're currently exploring, figuring out if Christianity is the correct religion, is a little bit further down the road of this particular prompt.
What I'm asking about is, or what I'm trying to get at, is an internal critique. So I'll grant you, like, if God exists, like, we can skip that. I want to get to, how does God interact with people?
Yeah. So there's different ways that he interacts with people. I don't know if you were here when I was talking about it, but like someone was bringing up like the divine hiddenness problem.
I heard the tail end of that. Yeah.
Yeah. So like my approach to the divine hiddenness problem, while I do believe that there are answers to it and that can be provided rationally and logically due to the pain that problem causes to a lot of well-meaning non-believers. Like, they want to believe. And
I heard you say this, and sorry to cut you off, but I do want to ask. You said you don't want to provide a rational answer, but I want to hear it. I want to hear it because for someone like me,
I don't want to provide it. I want to be careful when I do provide it because I want to be respectful of the people in that pain. But there's two possible responses. The one that I think will there's two that I think will resonate the most. The first is it's related to what I call, or what the church calls, sufficient grace. So the belief of the church is that God provides what is sufficient for a person to be able to achieve salvation, for them to accept salvation. And the idea of the divine hiddenness is taken from a misunderstanding that one requires belief in God, explicit belief in God, in order to attain and enter salvation, when that's not true within the church. In fact, it's condemned as a heresy. I think the name of it is Feeneyism. And it was a recent condemnation. I think it was with Vatican II when it was condemned. But anyways, the idea is that if God gives everyone what is sufficient for them to believe, or not, what is sufficient for them to enter heaven.
Okay, I was about to ask.
Yeah, that can include them not knowing that there is a God. Because and I don't know if I necessarily agree with this argument, but I can see the premise of it, and I feel like it's valid, but I don't know if it's at least when I was reading it, I don't feel like it was presented charitably, and I'm going to do my best to try to present it charitably. But the idea is that suppose you have an individual who has a very high libido, and because of that, they would struggle with, if they knew the truth of it, they would struggle with pornography, one night stands. Like they would struggle with all these things that would be contrary to the Catholic faith. And so God enables them to live in this state of ignorance in order that way then they aren't actually committing a sin. That way then when that pain of the flesh is removed at death and they see God, they're not tainted by those sins and they're able to accept God. Whereas if they knew of him but still struggled, now they're in danger of willingly, knowingly rejecting God, and that's where the sin comes in. So that could be an option.
So let me ask you this based off that. I have a mental picture of God because the first 20 years of my life I was as committed of a Christian as you could possibly be. I've over the last 10 years deconstructed and am now an agnostic atheist. But so I have a picture of God, correct or incorrect, a picture of God that pretty much aligns with Southern America normies that I know very well. Like I read the Bible more than most Christians. I know it very well, and I reject it for all kinds of reasons.
Yep.
Am I ignorant that I just have the wrong God, or am I like beeline to hell for that? You know what I mean?
So I don't know your actual orientation. So whenever I'm asked a question like this, I'm always going to take the most charitable side. Just keep that in mind.
Okay.
But it is possible for you to be rejecting the wrong image of God. And then once you die and you are face to face with God and you see, oh, this isn't the God that I thought existed. I was completely wrong. And then based on your orientation, whether you're truth-oriented or self-oriented, is then going to determine how you react to God in that moment.
Interesting. It's if I wasn't such an atheist, I would find that comforting, but but I'm pretty indifferent about it. But that is an interesting. I've actually never heard that argument. I can say I've walked away. I can walk away with something. Have learned something from this conversation. I was coming at you with basically what I was going to do is I was going to say how can an all powerful, all good God that knows this poor 7-year-old girl is about to, or this thing is happening to her. How does he not stop this guy? Yeah. Right. Everybody that I ask this question to says, oh, then he would intervene with free will. But it's like, but police intervene with free will when they arrest these monsters. So, and they should, and they're right to do so. What'd you say?
And the UPS driver was interfering with her free will.
Yeah. So the whole free will argument is so dumb to me because people have the moral obligation to interrupt someone's free will if they're being, in situations like that. Anyone would agree. Any sane person would agree with that. But so that's the angle I was coming at you. But you have such a different sort of setup for this thing that I kind of don't really know where to go with it. I mean, if God is just existence itself, then sure, believing in God is rational because you believe in existence. But you have to admit that is so far from normie theology.
Yeah. I will say, what I would say though is that normie theology is so far removed from the original theology, but
is this the no true Scotsman thing?
No, it's more of a lot of times what will happen is when I present this view of God, people will say, oh, this isn't the Christian God, so you're just making this up. Or a common one is I'll tell people that they're misunderstanding omnipotence when they say, oh, that means that God can do anything, and it's just well, no. It in layman's term, it means that everything that is logically possible or can exist, God is able to bring into existence. And they'll say, oh, that is a redefinition of omnipotence to avoid the rock is so heavy God can't lift it argument. And it's well, no, that understanding existed way before that argument ever did. It even existed even before Thomas Aquinas.
So the rock too heavy thing doesn't really bother me because that seems almost like a dumb word game. It doesn't. It's can you make a triangle of 4 sides? It's that's just. Can God be irrational? I mean, it's just dumb. It's just a dumb argument. I think it's just silly, But
that's more of what I was just trying to get at. Was just just because the position I hold is very far removed from the normie Christian understanding, doesn't mean that it's a new invention. In fact, probably the only thing that I would say is a new invention is my observation of can we even judge God's non-action? I haven't seen anyone talk about it, and if someone can find me something, I would love for them to send it over because this is uncharted waters for me, and I'm trying to figure it out. And if someone's already plotted the course, I would love to follow that path.
I don't know nearly enough to break any ground with you on that. I don't know nearly enough of your baseline of God and all this to break any ground with you for sure. I would be wasting your time and everyone in this live. So I'll probably bow out here, but
well, it was great having you up, man.
Yeah, interesting convo, dude. Very interesting. Let me do some homework. You said sufficient grace?
Yes.
Okay. Never heard of it.
Yeah, so it's sufficient grace, and then I think the other one is the other one, I forget the name of it, but the description of it is grace that when given compels action. But sufficient grace is something that we are able to cooperate with or not. And then the other grace is once we receive it, it compels us to act.
Gotcha. Interesting. All right, man.
You might want to look into the theology that's going to have both of those is single predestination or the Catholic understanding of predestination.
Oh, don't get me started on free will, dude. Yeah, I got you. All right. Thanks for the talk, dude. Have a good day.
You too.
All right, see you.
See ya. All right. I think we've got time for. I think we've got time for one more. Let's see.
Hello.
Hello. How are you doing?
Pretty good.
That's good to hear. What brings you up today?
So, I've been what the spiritual community calls seeker for a minute now. And I just kind of want to, the Catholic perspective is on, I suppose I don't understand how exactly we can make a free choice between heaven and hell exactly if God is to some extent hidden, and if you also hold the claim that there is this entity called the devil that, you know, lies to us. So I don't know exactly how we can have a fully informed choice, basically. So by what grounds, for instance, could I be damned?
So,
I guess.
Yeah, so the way that, like, so in the Catholic perspective, what damns an individual to hell is when they die in a state of unrepented mortal sin. Well, what's a mortal sin? A mortal sin is something that is grave matter, and the Church does not have an exhaustive list on what constitutes grave matter. What that means, but a good rule of thumb is effectively if it violates the 10 Commandments, it's probably grave matter. The second step is that you need to know that it's grave matter. Well, what does it mean? And the Church herself hasn't really said like what it means to know, but it's my opinion that in order for you to know that something is grave matter, like I'm assuming as a non-believer, you don't think that there's anything wrong with having sex outside of marriage, correct?
Yeah, no. Okay. Well, I would also, even if I were to be a believer, I would perhaps question what exactly Jesus meant when he was discussing the ethics of marriage, because I doubt he had the modern contemporary conception of what a marriage is, right? Like, I do believe that those would be two different things, but yes, I don't believe that's an issue.
Okay. So, but you do know that the Church, the Catholic Church, does say that it is a serious matter to have sex before marriage.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that you know that it's a serious matter, because just because you know someone else thinks that doesn't mean that you think that. Mm-hmm. So that's what I think the Church here means by no, because just because you know someone else thinks it doesn't mean that you think that, and if you don't think that, then you don't know it.
So you're saying God takes into account what we are convinced by?
Correct.
To an extent.
Yes. And so you would need to know that it's grave matter, and then you would also need to do it willingly, as in there wasn't a coercion in it. You weren't drunk. You weren't like, you were in full control of your capabilities and faculties. From there, when you die in that state and you're not sorry that you did that sin, that is what enables you to reject God after death. So that is what the Church says sends someone to hell. But that doesn't really tell us a whole lot, I feel like, especially for someone who is outside of the faith community. So the way that I describe it is sins are not a list of do's and don'ts. They are trying to describe right and wrong actions that help or harm your relationship with God. The example that I like to use on how an act can be sinful for me, but not for you, even if it's the same action, is, let's say you have this very close friend. You've been best friends for 10 years. And then this individual discovers, you know what? I am no longer a man. I identify as a woman. Please refer to me as Becky and use she, her pronouns. Now, because you know Becky as Brian for 10, 15 years, you might slip up with a he or Brian accidentally every now and then, but then you apologize and say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it that way. please forgive me.
Right.
Well, that's not going to harm the relationship, right?
No, or it shouldn't.
Yeah. Versus a bigot who comes up and insists on using the dead name and the wrong pronouns in order to hurt Becky. It's the same action, but because the intent is to hurt Becky, now it's damaging the relationship. Or even a step further, let's say that Becky hasn't taken the medication or done the corrective surgery or anything like that. So goes to the barista, orders a drink, and before she even says anything, the barista says, "How can I help you today, sir?" Well, the barista doesn't know that Becky's a she. Just made an assumption and made a mistake. That's not going to harm that relationship, right?
Okay.
So a mortal sin is going to be something that harms the relationship with God because you know it harms your relationship with God and you decided to do it anyways. Does that bigot desire a relationship with Becky? No.
Not even remotely.
Not even remotely. Someone who dies in a state of unrepented mortal sin is in that same state. And if you then say, well, what if they didn't know? Then it wasn't a mortal sin. The mortal sin requires them to know that this is something that they absolutely should not do, and they do it anyways, and they're not sorry for it. So then the question then becomes, well, that sounds like very few people would die in that state. That's my hope. In the Catholic Church, there's something called the Hope for an Empty Hell, where we acknowledge that it is possible for each individual to die in such a state that they would not reject God. Is it still possible? Yes. Are there still people who might pick that? Maybe. I hope not. But that is what leads someone to hell, is they look at God and they're that bigot, essentially, where they want nothing to do with him and they're going to do everything they can to hurt him. But if that's not the position that you're in, then I don't see why you would be in hell.
I see. I probably was given a disservice then, as my experience of Christianity only comes from Protestantism, and depending on denomination, opinions there can vary in reason quite a bit.
Yep.
The way the story was always given to me is that you have to accept this explicit series of doctrines and truth statements, and if you do not, then that is a thought crime, essentially. And that's been a huge barrier to me taking these ideas seriously. So I appreciate you elaborating on some of that.
And just to be clear, there is some disagreement on the idea of the hope for an empty hell. There's some people in the Catholic community who hold to a view called the fewness of the saved. I don't agree with that view. I don't think it's traditional, but it is an accepted view in the church. So please don't take what I'm saying as a universal position of Catholicism. It is a accepted with Catholicism. All that Catholicism states, though, is if you die in a state of unrepentant mortal sin, that's how you get to hell. Everything else beyond that is theology and speculation from the community.
Right. Catholicism is too large to be monolithic in opinion. Okay. Why do you believe? Okay, so why is hell necessary at all? I guess would be my question.
So
why even punish that bigot, for instance? Because even if I would be skeptical that the level of knowledge required to truly understand what you're rejecting would be impossible, considering that what we're talking about is something that is infinite, right? And I'm not making the claim that we can't make any positive statements about that sort of thing. We can't come to any conclusions whatsoever, but surely even that scenario would be very, very rare if we're really thinking about it, or I'd think it would be. But Scripture itself also says that the route to being saved is narrow and whatnot. So I don't, according to Scripture, just a basic reading of it, most people are going to hell. So I guess I don't know where you guys pull that interpretation out of Scripture, or how that's like. When do you decide to lean on tradition? When do you decide to lean on Scripture, and when do you decide to lean on reason? Like, what chooses the movement between those two things?
So there are passages in Scripture that hint at this hope. Christ desires all men to be saved. Well, God gets what He desires. It says that all Christ desires all to come to Him. We have those passages about everyone coming into the fold. Now, we do have passages, like you were saying, of people not being brought into the fold. So it's this tension, and theology is where we take the dogma of the church, which is this, the statement of to die in a state of mortal sin that is unrepented will send someone to hell. And the church also defines hell as eternal separation from God. And then it is the theologian's job to then wrestle with the tensions and the different things and try to come to new understanding. Now, as far as like what is the purpose or why does hell exist, while hell is often described as a place, when you look at the dogma of the Catholic Church, it describes hell primarily as a state of separation of relationship. Bishop Barron even talks about it could be the case that the suffering of hell is because the individual is actually in the presence of God, but because they are internally, like they themselves are the reason for this.
Are resistant.
Yeah, for it. And their resistance of that presence of God is what's causing the harm to that individual.
I thought that was an Eastern Orthodox view. Is that also held by some people in the Catholic Church? And I understand that you are not pushing what is the universal. But.
Yeah. Bishop Barron and Balthazar Balthazar was one of the first to kind of talk about the hope for an empty hell. Bishop Barron started pushing it, and then I think even Pope Francis at one point even made a comment relating to this hope for an empty hell. Now, as far as like the origin of the suffering, I don't know if like the way that I described it is an Orthodox teaching, but I did hear it from Bishop Barron, and that's his personal view, and that's one interpretation I'm open to. I've got one where the individual wishes to separate themselves from God, who is the source of their being, but they want to be their own source of being. They want to exist themselves. They want to be their own grounding of existence, so they don't desire annihilation. And so they're trying to pull away from God, but to pull away from God would lead to annihilation, but they're trying not to be annihilated, which leads to this contradiction, which leads to that suffering. And so because of that, the suffering of hell isn't something that God himself creates. There is an individual hell for each individual based on the fact that it's an internal suffering based on their resistance and rejection of God.
Interesting. Okay. Actually, you kind of answered a question I was going to ask, which is how exactly can you have separation from God and then that gets you ECT? I've never understood that because I've always thought that if you're separate from God, wouldn't that just mean you don't exist?
Yeah.
Like how can you be the own ground of your own existence if you take the priors of classical theology? It doesn't make sense. Okay. All right. Well, I guess my question then this is probably my last question, and I'll let you go. One thing I take all the hell stuff out of it. One thing I haven't understood of Catholicism or Orthodoxy is sort of this. What I have, and this is probably poor understanding. What I see is like the gatekeeping of relationship with God, and maybe I'm just not well read up on the different opinions of different bishops or cardinals or whatever. But yeah, you guys believe that your Eucharist is the only valid one, maybe with an exception for Eastern Orthodox, right? So it's that sort of, you guys are the only home for a positive relationship with God, right? Like, what is the compassionate Buddhist tapping into
Mhm.
when they are meditating or getting closer to what they would call awakening, right? Like, where is that compassion coming from? Why is Catholicism the only home for right relationship with God? Why is God monolithic rather than pluralistic?
Yeah. So let me ask. So the way that I would describe it is, you have. Do you have a family member that you see maybe once a year?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you have a relationship with that family member. Is it the same strength of a relationship as someone that you see every day?
No.
Does that make that relationship any less important though, or any less?
No.
So the Catholic Church's view is that the way to have the fullness of a relationship with God is through the Catholic Church, but God is able to have a relationship with others outside of the Catholic Church, but they wouldn't have access to those sacraments through the ordinary means, which are provided through the Catholic Church. And so the claim is not that you can't have any relationship with God. So that Buddhist is tapping into God in some capacity, but it wouldn't be as full as someone who is receiving the sacraments on a regular basis. So it's not really trying to say that, oh, what that Buddhist is tapping into isn't real, or they're not having a relationship with God, or they don't have a real connection. It's more of trying to point out that kind of capacity of like, hey, just because you have a real, valid, and legitimate relationship with that family member you see once a year, it's not as full of a relationship as if you saw that same family member every day.
I see. Okay. I'm probably going to let you go here. While I'm not so sure, but I am convinced that you guys have that fullness exclusively yourself, I do want you to know that I'll probably walk away with a much more open-minded opinion on Catholics. Probably need to re-examine those views.
The goal of this is not to convince anyone to Catholicism or even to believe in God. It's just, have a conversation and let people realize, hey, maybe there's a little bit more than I originally gave credit.
Yeah, I was always, social media and just the popular culture has always given me this very hard-nosed, stick up the butt sort of impression, but that does not seem the case talking to you, so I'm going to have to do some more reading. All right, have a good one.
You too. Well, I think I'm going to call it there as well. I got to start getting ready for work, but thank you everyone for coming. I think this was one of my more popular lives, almost nonstop guests, so that makes me excited. Probably going to keep doing it on the phone because that seemed to get a lot more interaction. Yes, I'll see you on Discord. But thank you all for coming, and y'all enjoy the rest of your day.